Great to be here. Thanks everyone for coming live, and thanks Wally for tuning in virtually. Thanks David for coming to sit with us. We'd love to just start off, let's talk a little back in history, and maybe more than 2 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, like back to the beginning of crypto. Like, tell us like how you first came across any form of like virtual payment system.
Yeah, sure. First of all, thanks so much for having me here today, and thinking about the journey for crypto for myself. My background, for those in the audience and those listening virtually, is 20 years as a prosecutor, both in the federal system and the state and local system, most recently in the Manhattan District Attorney's Office before I came out to PayPal. And when I think about the journey for me, it was when I was prosecuting child exploitation crimes at the DOJ in the child exploitation and obscenity section. And there, you think about crimes committed against children as one-off offenses often. But what we were looking at there were large money laundering rings. And at the time, and I'm going to date myself a little bit, but at the time, e-gold was the thing. And e-gold is not what we're dealing with right now. I just want to be clear about that in terms of our conversation. But e-gold was a large problem in child exploitation rings. And for us, we were looking at it from a money laundering lens because the penalties were good, the proof was good, and the ability to kind of look at that in that light was really important. So for me, that's where my first exposure to it was. And fast forward 20 years, I didn't think I'd be sitting in this seat at PayPal looking at a new iteration of this, which is very different, way more responsible, and way more, from an investigative standpoint, way more tangible actually for an investigator to deal with.
And when you like take yourself back to sort of your government context and you look at those types of cases and you're sort of sending subpoenas to all of these private sector entities and you're trying to get information about these cases and push it forward, and you're getting frustrated that the response times are too long, or how do you end up making the jump from the public sector into the private sector? How did you think about making that transition, and how was it for you arriving at PayPal?
Yeah, so for me, I actually never thought I would go to the private sector. I graduated from law school. My dream job was to actually be at the Manhattan DA's office and spend 2 to 3 years prosecuting misdemeanor cases, 250 cases at a clip, caseloads that were difficult to manage, but taught you how to think on your feet, how to triage cases and issues in a way that I think few get trained. But when I thought about coming out of government, the North Star piece was very important to me. And I know that's kind of cliche, but for those of you who are in government, you kind of walk out of the office every day, you kind of feel like you've done something hopefully good, or at least the opportunity to do good is absolutely there. And when I got approached by PayPal to come aboard, this was in 2016. It was right after the spinoff from eBay, and the company was thinking about how do you make compliance an asset in terms of our marketing, in terms of our product launches, not just something that you actually fund when a regulator is looking or a prosecutor is looking or you're under some kind of consent order or decree. I never want one of those. And PayPal had a vision of how do we use our dual-sided network, which has merchants and consumers on the platform communicating together. How do you think about that data pool and use it responsibly, legally, but for good? And Dan Szuchman, who's our CEO, had a vision of, I want to proactively go after crime. I don't want to sit and react to a subpoena. I don't want to react to 10 subpoenas and then try to figure out what happened. I want you to invest and think about data and analytics in a way that's going to get us to a new place as a compliance function. And for me, that was a cool opportunity. And probably one of the only things that would have drawn me out of government at that point of my career. I was running the investigation division at Danny, was my dream job. And the power to do this was too good to not try to do it at that point in my career. So what we've tried to build at PayPal is we've tried to build an environment where we can lean in with law enforcement responsibly, understand the latest technologies and trends, think about our products, and I think this is so key. I know there's IRS CI in the room, other organizations from the law enforcement side. It's so key to understand the product launches, Because when you're sitting on the government side, you're often reacting to how fraudsters, scam artists, criminal doers are monopolizing and figuring out how to find loopholes in the new product launch. So to lean in with law enforcement, explain the product launch, explain how we see it's being used, and then understand from them the vulnerabilities, because you know it's going to happen, and then how do we close that gap on the private side?
And I think that's you know, we obviously describe our product launches, which are just like easy and not fit for abuse. But you know, we think about how fast innovation moves within this space and how much the products are changing over time. You know, we mentioned sort of e-gold cases, and like that's a whole different sphere. Like that was maybe just the beginning of like the seed of an idea of like how value on the internet would change. And you know, when I think of PayPal as a brand, I think about you know, the early ideas behind crypto, about an internet payment system, about a way to connect everyone in the world. And so, you know, it seems natural that, you know, PayPal would want to go into crypto. Maybe you could tell me a little bit about like why is PayPal now going into crypto, and why did it take you guys so long?
Well, again, if you think about our journey, the spinoff in 2016, we think of ourselves as innovators, right, from the beginning. I think what we've become is kind of the mature fintech, you know, in the space. And even my conversations with regulators from when I started in 2016 to now, you can see the difference in the life cycle of those conversations with regulators, that we are no longer kind of the 13 or 14-year-old who's maturing. You know, we have matured, but we are the innovators in the fintech space. We are I think, the responsible innovators in the space. So to your point, why did it take us so long? I think we wanted to figure out, with our mission of democratizing financial systems, payments, globally, what's the next logical step for us to do that? And crypto is just a natural segue for us at this point in our journey to add that into our portfolio. And we've started small, as you know. Maybe everybody in the audience doesn't know, but we've started really with buy, hold, and sell only. That was, first precursor was you could top up using your PayPal account and buy. Now we're actually allowing buy, hold, sell on the platform, all in the PayPal wallet, all in a closed loop environment, which we think is very safe and secure. But what it's really allowing us to do, to Wally's points earlier, from a compliance standpoint, we're understanding how this is all working.
Yeah.
And I think we're taking a methodical, slow, purposeful approach to it so we can get our feet under us and continue to educate. And I know we're going to talk a bit about that, but I just think there's so much out there that is scary that folks can talk about, by the way, with any store value or you know, in any kind of scam. But I think the education piece is important, and that's what we're learning.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, when I think about lengths of time, I mean, obviously everything gets condensed in crypto world. But like, I think that, you know, in the last sort of 10 years, the crypto space has really sort of built what I would really refer to as like financial primitives, things that people can then build applications and real consumer use cases on top of. And you're really seeing that now, 12 years into this industry, you're now seeing people really build those things. And you know, PayPal entering is like a good example of, you know, there are, I don't know how many users of PayPal there are, but there are a lot of users around the world who are now starting to get access to actually a financial product that they can use that takes care of them. And like, how do you think about the type of product offering that you give to consumers? Like at the end of the day, those are the end goal.
Certainly, you know, us understanding our base, our customers. What do they need? What do they want? How do we think about fueling those needs? So what we're trying to do is bring responsible innovation to them. And what we are seeing either on Venmo or on PayPal, for those of you who know Venmo, it's part of PayPal, sometimes a little known fact. But what we are seeing is that there is a real desire for it. And I think part of the reason is they want to come to a responsible platform that they know and that they trust. And what we first tried to market to is, what is our base of users that are already existing on the platform? And how do we want to understand how they want to use us? And what we're really getting from, again, that slow walk is we're understanding how they actually want to use us. And that will inform where we can go moving forward. We've just also launched in the UK for buy, hold, sell, and understanding how that launch, is occurring. But as you know, jurisdictionally, this is challenging across the globe, different requirements, different standards. We are a global country, everywhere from Australia to the UK to the US, and so on and so forth. So for us, it's thinking about the footprint, thinking about where it makes sense, and understanding what our customers really want.
And I think that that's super important to get a global perspective. We're sitting here in New York. We've got people tuning in all over the world who want access to crypto in PayPal. And I think that when I think about the different regulatory regimes and the role really of a company like PayPal with the reputation that you have, how do you think about regulatory engagement across the world? How do you strategize about it? How are you going about setting up those good conversations to be able to move the conversation forward?
Yeah, it's a great question and a great point. Our philosophy straight from the beginning, when this iteration of our compliance team came in 5 years ago, was we're not building walls and then waiting for regulators to try to climb over the wall to have a conversation with us. Makes no sense. And what we've tried to do, no matter what the product is or no matter what the issue is lean in and have a conversation. Why are you interested in PayPal? What are the issues that you're seeing? How can we educate you about PayPal? When you think about PayPal, we are not a bank. We are not a bank. We are an MSB. And that education piece, just to understand how PayPal works, how the two-sided network actually works, how do our payment rails work, in what countries are we enabled? We spend so much time educating on just the distinction between who we are and who a bank is, because we think different regulations should apply to what we do versus what a bank may do, because the risk profile is different. Our risk assessment is different. And articulating that is just hugely important. So for us, we're taking the same philosophy to crypto. We are in the United States. We are sitting in New York. New York DFS does regulate us. We work very hard with the New York DFS, understanding their role, their creativity, their innovation, and what they're looking at, and how we can also educate them and give them the information they need to continue to regulate us responsibly and also foster innovation, which is a main goal of theirs. So for us, we're really just trying to take that same approach globally and make sure, have those conversations, don't shy away from them. And when we think about regulation, we think we're poised with the investments we've made in compliance to take advantage of responsible regulation, but we want to be at the table having that conversation and make sure PayPal's unique interest and our unique profile is really taken into account.
And maybe switching gears away from PayPal just for a second is, when you think about, and I think you're articulated it well with sort of, PayPal has a unique model and definitely was a pioneer. Crypto's definitely also got a unique profile. It's got unique attributes. How do you feel like people come with their preconceived notions of crypto?
Yeah.
How does that change those types of conversations?
I think you're immediately on your heels in a conversation when folks come with preconceived notions about crypto. And when I think about crypto and I think about the company's ability in crypto, and as an investigator, my heart, no matter what role I'm at, I'm an investigator. And I try to infuse that. We have folks here from PayPal. We try to infuse that in our team. We have tons of former prosecutors, tons of former law enforcement who are part of our teams. And that ethos, I think, is really important from an investigative standpoint. I think what our folks understand, what you understand, because we're able to use your tool in this way, is there's so much that you can trace using the tools that you have on the blockchain. And to me, when I think about crime committed using cash, and having done so many of these in my career, good luck tracing that. Good luck, finding the trace of cash. Maybe you can find an in point and an out point, and that's where you have to always look at. But here, I can think about actual tracing that occurs, and I can follow this in a whole different way. And to me, that opportunity is really stunning. And for us as investigators, I think it excites us to think about how we can follow the money through the blockchain in a really fine-grained and fine-point way, and then provide that information to law enforcement through our suspicious activity reporting, through conversations with OFAC, so on and so forth. But I think the opportunity here is huge. Are there gaps? For sure. And I don't want to listen to Wally's comments and say the couple of things that he highlighted in terms of ransomware attacks and others are not happening. Of course they're happening. But as you noted, they're happening anyway. It's just how can we use the blockchain and use the technology to actually trace these crimes, get to the bad actors, and then work globally actually to figure out ways to deter the conduct, which is hard, but doable. And I think maybe a little more doable using this technology.
And maybe just like, and I think you're absolutely right. And we touch on sort of the traceability of the blockchain being that one of those unique attributes of this payment system where you can have, multiple people inspecting the same transaction, right? You've got this entire room of people who are able to all look at the same transaction and all bring whatever form of intelligence they have about those transactions and bring it to bear on an investigation. Like that doesn't really happen in the context of a closed payment system where, information is siloed and it's in each of the organizations. I think the other thing that we chatted about, which was the preservation of evidence. Like you mentioned cash, right? Like that, a cash payment is ephemeral. I hand you a $100 bill, that's the end. Now, the blockchain, the one thing it does better than almost anything else is it preserves that information forever. Mm-hmm. And you can then go back in 10 years from now, and based on some piece of information that you found in your transactions today, you can actually solve a case in 10 years from now or 20 years from now. And I think that type of attribute is also, needs to be understood in order to build a framework of like, how do you build a compliance program? How do you build a regulatory regime? Like, how does that work? So there are these unique attributes of the technology that provide just such opportunity for, for law enforcement, but also for compliance regimes. I mean, how did you at PayPal, when you're stepping into this, how do you think about staffing a function for stepping into the crypto space?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one that we've been spending a ton of time on. Some of our folks are sitting here who we've recruited. I just want to go back for 1 second to one point you made, and then I'll get to the hiring and talent point. The point you made about the community coming together and adding information that the tool, in Chainalysis, for example, leverages, that's beyond innovative. You think about the way we try to communicate as the private sector with each other and the way the government has tried to foster that through the Patriot Act 314, et cetera, which you and I talked about a little bit in our prep session, for this. The way that the tool actually works solves so many of those issues and problems. It takes out the slowness, right? It takes out the difficulty in collaboration. It accelerates all of that in a way that is actually very unique. And in my investigative time and career, you don't really see that in any other tool or in any other way that allows that information to come together and have these transactions tagged. And your point about the preservation is huge. I cannot tell you how many cases I've done in my career where there's an online presence, you're trying to get information, either it's encrypted or otherwise, maybe not preserved, maybe not actually regulated or governed, in a certain way. So you're pulling at threads to try to get that information in. If you don't preserve and send a letter of preservation under the Electronic Communications Privacy Act so quickly, you may just lose that information, period. Right. So the points you're making, I think, are just trying to put a fine point on it, because I think those are big, especially for the investigative community to kind of understand the distinctions there. In terms of hiring and in terms of talent, it's been so much fun. And I say that because I think this is an area where a lot of people are putting their toes in the water, their feet in the water, and trying to understand crypto. But when you want to hire, you really have to get below the people who are just putting their feet in the water. You really have to get at who are the experts that you need to bring on, who can you grow, who can you train, and how do you kind of think about that? And then who can you put in front of a regulator or a partner to talk about the controls that you're building to build confidence. So for us, it's been hard because there isn't really a depth of that community as this is really emerging in a new way. But we're investing, big time in getting the right people through the door. We've taken some folks in our own shop who are just talented, smart individuals and moved them over to these areas because they understand PayPal, and now they're understanding, crypto in a big way. But it's a mix, and I think it's really important to bring folks in who understand, the complete ecosystem.
Yeah, and we find like a similar thing at Chainalysis where we have to bring a really diverse range of people into the organization to serve all of the different use cases that we think about. We have people from all sorts of places around the world. We have also people who've come from law enforcement who then come into the company and bring the language, the nomenclature, the understanding of really like what is the government's problem that they're trying to solve, and like how do we better like position ourselves in that conversation. Just going back maybe to sort of the overarching theme of the conference and sort of why this room is so important is in collaborating. I just want to go back to like never in your career have you seen sort of an arena where you can have real-time information sharing between law enforcement, financial institutions, applications, everyone looking at the same set of information. How does that influence the future of regulation, not just for the crypto space, but like how does that inform actually how we think about regulation more broadly than that?
I think that's the exact innovative point that regulators should be looking at and saying, how is this community coming together to solve financial crime in a way that actually scales to other areas? I think the reverse is kind of what's happening in the conversation, which is we want to understand how this technology works. We want to regulate and work on it. But at the same time, I think you have to understand what is working here. Who are the responsible vendors and parties in it? What kind of collaborative approach has been fostered here uniquely? And then how do you lift and shift that into the regular environment that we're working in? And I really think if you could take those learnings and bring it over, we can have much easier conversations with our partners. The tool that your product lead was describing earlier, that's a great tool, but we have to have government actually enable that ability to have that conversation between parties in order to make it as useful as it possibly can be. And I think that's your point, is how do you take these pieces of what is actually working and then foster that growth and allow government to put their fingerprints on it. And I think that's really important. When you think about the role FinCEN can play, in this space, especially the states, they can help and want to help foster that innovation and allow us to actually look at these pieces as a community. Because if you come together as a community, you're going to be able to solve crime. We all know that some fraudster that's sitting on PayPal exploiting us is sitting on multiple other platforms doing the same thing at the same time. And if we can have that conversation quickly, you can really solve crime.
And I think that it gets to sort of your original point and sort of Dan's vision, which talks about like prevention and not just reaction, right? Like it's about proactively going after these types of cases. I mean, when you think about sort of even sort of PayPal more generally, like, and you go hunting for different types of crime, like do you design task forces that go after that? Like how do you source that information, and how do you think about sourcing that information in the crypto space?
I think the public-private partnership is huge, but what we've also tried to do is we've tried to invest in some nonprofits that also I think have a very important role to play in this space. I'll mention one, which is Polaris. I don't know if there are any Homeland Security folks in the audience or virtually on. Homeland Security is actually working with Polaris. Polaris is the hotline for all human trafficking victims in the United States. So if you're trafficked and you need help, you pick up the phone. Polaris staff's actually that hotline for the government. And what we have found through our conversations with Polaris is that they're getting a lot of information in, but not thinking about it from a white-collar financial perspective originally, right? They wanted to, they had ideas how to do that, but what we said is let us bring our white-collar experience to help you and fund you. So we've helped them stand up a financial intelligence unit, thinking about human trafficking typologies, and then we've brought in other private sector partners to have that partnership with them. They bring in government, we bring in the private sector. Now you have a sharing agreement that you can actually action and get real intelligence into the private sector. We always think about it this way. Law enforcement knows who they're interested in. They know the bad actors that they think that are causing problems, be it terror finance or human trafficking or whatever your high-risk typology is you want to look at. Our goal is to try to get that information into our hands and be able to look at it across and then find out what is really happening. You can develop every transaction monitoring rule you want. There always are going to be the exceptions to that rule. We want the exceptions. So we're thinking about any kind of partnership that actually enables us to be taller and to understand more.
And how do you, and I think that that makes a lot of sense. And we actually at Chainalysis also invest in charities and nonprofits that collect unique pieces of information. We work with the Internet Watch Foundation as a good example that's really helped us track these different types of crime. And actually, the whole way that we design our intelligence function is building out these centers of excellence around specific types of crime to be able to really map the network of people and actors that we want to go after. I mean, how do you think about, are there unique opportunities to do that in the crypto space? So Wally's sort of mentioning his list of things that he wants us to go after. But how do you think about collecting that information and acting upon it?
I think the network analysis capabilities in the blockchain are just tremendous. And again, as investigators, that's what excites us when we think about, you can go after one thread and from my perspective, file a suspicious activity report on the one thread that you're given. You get a lead, one thread, you filed it, you've technically fulfilled your responsibility, right, in terms of a regulatory exposure. But what we try to do is blow out the network, right? Because law enforcement has limited resources. The one-off is not necessarily what they want. They want the network. They want to go after it in a bigger way. I think the blockchain affords you the ability to think about that network in a much, much bigger way. And what excites us also is I can think about potential blockchain activity. I can think about our customer base. I have data pools that I can look at that can really show cross-property activity and really cross-jurisdictional activity combined with the power of the blockchain really allows you to bring much bigger cases to law enforcement and do that in a real responsible way.
And I think that, it's a fascinating thing when people first sort of get that realization, right? Because most people who've worked in compliance and you're running that rules engine, you've got the alert, you clear the alert, or you file a SAR, you're doing that on a very sort of batch basis. And you're not actually seeing sort of the interconnected nature of a lot of this crime. And I think that sometimes it's like the blockchain that first like opens up someone's mind to like, okay, the network view is the primary view of like how we should be looking at this problem rather than, just the list of alerts that's sort of streaming at you. And so, I've seen that, and particularly, examples where one extortion payment is like, a $500 payment, and that doesn't hit any sort of threshold in law enforcement. And then you've got to actually go and uncover, that went into a wallet that contained, $500,000 worth. And now, the FBI is interested or someone else is interested in being able to tackle that. So I think there's, definitely this data that you can get when you think about these investigations that can help really size them properly and escalate them properly. And that's something that we're very keen to think about, like how do we embed data like even deeper beyond just transaction monitoring to inform how people prioritize their business, both for good and for bad. So maybe just switching gears a little bit, and maybe for people that don't know exactly what the vision is behind sort of PayPal stepping into the market, can we go into what are those big ideas? Maybe not this year for PayPal, but maybe looking out a little bit further. Like what is PayPal doing in the crypto space longer term?
Yeah, I would say a couple of things. One is on the investment side of this is where it really all begins for us. And I mentioned the buy, hold, sell. We also stood up our own business unit. And for those of you not in the private sector, that's a pretty big deal to isolate a special business unit just for this. So our blockchain and digital currency unit was started last year. And again, to your point about bringing in the right talent to run those units, to make sure that you could stand it up, recruited the right people, got the right people, so the innovation pieces are there. We've also made some strategic investments, along the way to make sure the company is on the cutting edge of different technologies and tools. Right now, we are sitting with our buy, hold, sell. in our markets, and then looking at our next opportunities, I think it's pretty apparent and obvious that the company has a bigger appetite in the space, and that's what we're considering for our next steps. But there will be next steps.
And if basically we have, an ecosystem in PayPal where, people are able to do these things, and, has there been, any appetite even amongst, the other side of the network? Like, has anyone on the merchant side been talking about it? I know there's a lot of talk about stable coins and central bank digital currencies. How do you think that conversation is evolving?
I think the conversation is one of opportunity and education as you get there. We did also launch as part of our offering the ability to pay with crypto, right, with the merchant. It's not a direct integration in terms of I'm taking my Bitcoin and paying directly to the merchant. We actually exchange the Bitcoin and they get fiat. So it's, I think, a novel way to start getting folks used to transacting this way. And I think our merchant base will be really excited about the opportunity of PayPal being at the forefront of these opportunities. That's what we're trying to bring. We don't want our merchant base left behind. We don't want our consumers, left behind. So you can see the interest. You understand globally that there is a need to actually do this for folks who don't have access, and even people who do have access to the financial system want to do it this way more and more. So for us, that's what we're considering. So the learnings we're getting even from the way we're doing payments right now between merchants and consumers, again, allow us to do that slow walk run and think about this in a much bigger way.
And I think that to me has always been, and again, it's not even like a 1-year project, but when I think about crypto moving forward 10 years from now, we're here at the beginning of a lot of those real use cases being developed, and Wally spoke really well about their hopes for the technology to actually have this type of impact on the world. And I think that when we get to a point where every part of the payment ecosystem is in, like that's going to be a big moment for crypto and for the technology.
Yeah, and I think honestly that's where PayPal can really help, because where we sit in the ecosystem is we're a partnership model at the end of the day. We have partners in the banking sector, we have partners globally, from a payments perspective. So getting other partners used to the idea, our risk appetite may be different than X partner's appetite, but getting that partner closer to us is part of the challenge and the goal in thinking about this kind of space. We do that all the time with lots of different products that we have. This is just another example, but that's, I think, what excites us also is our team getting everybody comfortable with this, in the entirety, and that comes from really building a strong control environment. It's, this is kind of basic stuff, but you have to have a strong risk assessment to start with. You have to have a strong risk assessment process. You have to be able to show your control environment. You have to be able to show your inherent and residual risks. All of this stuff is what we do every day at our compliance function, but acutely needs to be done here and needs to be represented in a real responsible way. And then the cases that we hear about in the news, you have to be able to show how your control environment was looking at those cases. If there's a gap, how you are quickly remediating that gap. You also have to have the relationship with your product folks. And the point about compliance being at the table with product and the business, I know that's like a talking point on every panel, but it is true. If you're not at the table and you're not sitting there, going through wireframes with the business and understanding each step and have the right people sitting there looking at the wireframes with them and saying, we want to create a good customer experience, I get it. But let me tell you the CIP piece I need in here. I need it right here, and if it fails, here's where I need it to go. And here's where I need it to then go to the manual investigator. I can automate this piece. I feel comfortable with that. We've tested that in the sandbox. Here's my data on it. I understand it. I can explain it. Let's move past that. Each one of these little pieces are so crucial to creating a successful narrative and be able to explain to your partners and to your regulators that we are a company that get it, and we've spent the time, resources, and data analytics to be able to explain it.
I want to name like partner X as a bank just for the moment, and think about that, because I think that
you're changing it to Bank X.
No, Bank X. I'm changing it to Bank X. We won't single out any banks in the room. But I think that one interesting thing that we spoke about a little bit, and Michael says bank every 3 words, but is like, how has it been sort of explaining to bank partners, because obviously that's a critical lifeblood and thing for PayPal. Like, how has it been? How have you found the reception to PayPal going into crypto with banking partners?
Yeah, I mean, for us right now with what we're offering, it's not necessarily a key part of what we need to do. But what I would say, just when you think about the 40th floor looking down at the space in its totality, you can see the movement and the change, right? You can see the thought process changing. You can see the way banks are talking about this and thinking about this. Michael's video where he showed the 2019 to today, and you see the incremental change. I think a lot of folks looked at this 3-4 years ago and said, it's a fascination, it's a fad. This is not going to stay around. It's not going to stick, right? Is it another e-gold or not? And I think what we're seeing now is you're seeing real roots, being put into the ground. And I think that means it's here to stay. And I think that's why you're looking at government and regulators saying the things that they're saying, because they're trying to understand and get their arms wrapped around it. The banks are also, trying to do the same. And I think there's an understanding that if you don't get involved in this now, you're going to be left behind. And when you're left behind, that's not necessarily a good business opportunity in the end. So to the extent that business and innovation is driving this, I feel a very different environment than I felt a couple of years ago.
Yeah, and it feels like the reception to really have a good conversation around both the business opportunity and be able to understand new business models that this space unlocks, as well as new ways for risk to be mitigated, I think is, we're seeing it across our business, from, the smallest like DeFi platforms to the largest financial institutions, all sort of being able to speak even the same language now about, what are the opportunities here and what are the risks that we need to take care of. I think the fact that there's it feels like everyone is now talking roughly the same language, which wasn't the case 2 to 3 years ago. I'm sure you've been educating people for a while in this space. I'm sure you've had many Bitcoin 101 sessions.
We have them. Yeah, we have them all the time, and our folks are doing them all the time to make sure that the education piece is really out there. But I think it's also educating about which tools allow you to do the work, and then to explain the output of those tools so it's really understood. I think also the cool thing about PayPal is we are a technology in our heart, the technology company in our heart. So for us, you look at the tool suite that's out there, and then you think, okay, what can we stack on top of that from PayPal's own innovation, from our own teams, and then build that together. And that's been one of the really fun things for us to be able to do also, is to figure out how can we actually add value to what the tools are that are out there, and then be able to present that.
And how is it received? How are the tools received at sort of law enforcement? You've done this for many years, and also at partners.
And you probably have a great perspective on this, because anytime you use a complicated tool, I think about like the first iterations of I2, right? If you're an investigator, I2 is a networking tool. It's sometimes you need a fly swatter and you have a bazooka, let's say, with I2. You need to think about that tool and who are the users that are getting on and using the tools and using it enough that they actually understand the functionalities and can then use the functionalities the right way. That's what I think always is the challenge, both from law enforcement perspective and from a private sector perspective. Always the interesting decisions in law enforcement, you often get people who are great at their job. They do it for a year or two, and then they're moving on to another detail or another office or another location. I think that's part of the challenge for the industry, period, when you're thinking about blockchain investigations, is how do you keep the talent in the right place? How do you keep the butt in the seat, if you will? Because that's really important, actually, for success here. These are not tools that you can just sit down and day one, you're ready to go. You have to understand how to use them.
Yeah, and so back to your talent point, like we currently have trained over 4,000 people around the world to use Chainalysis products. So there's a long list. We'll send it to you afterwards for you to help with some recruiting. But we definitely see our role in being able to train people to, as Pradham has said, like simplify the complex, be able to actually look at a graph and be able to interpret what are the important nodes in that, what are not. And actually, I think that it's the responsibility of every organization to actually build that into the strategy behind how you go to the market. So yeah, I'm super excited that PayPal is coming into crypto and is in crypto today, and there's more to come. I think that when we sit here in 5 years, do you think, how do you think the speeches are changing? What do you think the narrative? What do you think the narrative?
My hope would be in 5 years, we have government officials and private sector standing up together, saying, "Here's how we solved these crimes together," and that you can then point to the pieces of technology, the artifacts, the evidence that was gleaned from these technologies to help solve crime. So I look forward to us kind of getting past the narrative of the fear factor, into it, which I understand, and I think, the education piece is really important there. But to get to the point where we're saying, here's how we solved crime doing this, and here's how you can actually think about deploying this and scaling this in a whole different way. Hopefully in 5 years, that's the look back of where we are as a community, writ large, which I think is completely possible.
No, I like that a lot. And I know it takes a long time to build those cases. So I know that people will get on doing that. Thank you so much for coming here and participating with me. It's been an awesome conversation. It's great to see, the fintech, the biggest fintech in the United States actually coming into the space and, offering, a great product to all of the consumers and helping us build the industry. So thanks so much, David.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. Thanks so much.